The Lost Scrolls, Ep.6, Giants in Canaan, the War for the Promised Land. Mantle. The wind was a low moan through the canyons of Moab, a physical presence that carried the scent of distant pines and the grit of ancient stone. Below, the sprawling camp of Israel was a galaxy of flickering fires, a sea of humanity held in a collective, hushed breath. The air, thick with the smoke of 100,000 hearths, tasted of grief. Moses was gone. The mountain walker, the voice of God, was dust. And the silence where his words should have been was a crushing weight that now settled upon the shoulders of one man. Joshua, son of Nun, stood on a high precipice, a solitary silhouette against a bruised twilight sky. Before him, the Jordan River snaked through the valley, a barrier of churning silver. And beyond it, under a sky of gathering storm, the Promised Land waited, a dream that flowed with milk and honey, a nightmare haunted by giants. Covenant. It came to him not as a sound, but as a pressure building behind his eyes, a white-hot certainty that flooded his veins and set his very bones alight. As I was with Moses, so I shall be with you. I will not fail you nor forsake you. The words were a brand upon his soul, a fire that consumed all doubt. Be strong and very courageous. Joshua's shoulders, once bowed by the mantle, straightened. He turned, his face illuminated by the flickering torchlight of his centuries, and a gasp rippled through those who saw him. The ghost of Moses was gone from his eyes. In its place was the dawn of a terrible and glorious purpose, a leader forged in divine fire, his gaze reflecting the 1,000 flames of their hope. Eyes. Caleb of Judah, his jaw set like stone. Salmon of Naphtali, who moved with the lethal grace of a shadow. They were the eyes of Israel. They slipped into the churning, frigid waters of the Jordan, the current a hungry beast tearing at their limbs. On the far side, the very air felt different, heavy, ancient, and hostile. They moved through fields of unnatural size, past trees that seemed to claw at the sky. And then they saw it, Jericho. Not a city of mud and brick, but a fortress of cyclopean stone that blotted out the stars, built by a power that held humanity in contempt. And walking its ramparts were sentinels whose footsteps shook the ground, their shadows stretching like spears in the dying sun. Whispers. The streets of Jericho were canyons of cold stone, where the guttural shouts of giant sentries echoed off walls built for titans. Sanctuary was found in the most unlikely of places, the rooftop of Rahab, a woman whose eyes held the weary wisdom of a fallen age. As the heavy tread of guards shook the building, she hid the spies beneath the scratchy, fragrant stalks of drying flax. In the stark moonlight that silvered the roof, her voice was a desperate, trembling whisper. I know the Lord has given you this land, for a terror of you has fallen upon us, she breathed, her words misting in the cool night air. Swear to me, by the life of your God, that you will save my family. Giants. They stumbled back into camp near dawn, mud-caked and hollow-eyed, their faces masks of sheer terror. Before Joshua, their report tumbled out in ragged breaths. The land, it flows with milk and honey, as you said. Salmon's voice cracked. But the cities are built into the mountains themselves, and the people, he shuddered, unable to continue. Caleb took over, his voice a low rasp. We saw the sons of Anak there, the Nephilim. He looked at his own hands, then at Joshua. In our own sight, we were as grasshoppers, and so we were in theirs. A cold dread, more chilling than the desert night, snaked through the listening elders, silencing the camp with a venomous whisper of despair. Fire. Joshua let the silence hang, let the fear fester for a single, agonizing beat. Then his voice shattered the stillness, not a shout, but a blade of sound that severed the creeping dread. The Lord is with us. The words were a physical force, pushing back the encroaching shadows. He strode into the circle of elders, his eyes blazing. Their protection is gone. They are bread for us. Do not fear the shadows on the wall. His faith was a contagion of fire. Heads that had been bowed began to lift. Eyes that were downcast met his. The memory of a parted sea, of a burning bush, of bread from heaven rekindled their courage from a dying ember into a roaring inferno. Decree. That night, a vision came to Joshua, not of glory, but of a chilling, holy purpose. He saw the high places of Canaan, the altars slick with the blood of children, and heard the whispers of rites that profaned the sun. The decree that settled in his soul was absolute, cold, and terrible. You shall make no covenant with them. You shall utterly destroy them. You shall break down their altars. This was not a war for territory, for grain, for gold. It was an exorcism. The voice of a divine surgeon pronouncing judgment on a cancer that had festered for centuries in the heart of the world. The land itself was groaning, crying out for a cleansing of fire and steel. Titan, the earth began to tremble long before he was seen. Og, king of Bashan, the last of the old Rephaim, a relic from an age when monsters ruled the world. He strode from his fortress of basalt, his skin like cracked granite, his laughter a grinding of tectonic plates that sent birds scattering from the trees. He was a primordial power of stone and fury, a mountain given life and malice. His army was a legion of nightmares at his back. But as this titan loomed on the horizon, a quiet fire bloomed in Joshua's soul, a whisper that defied the earthquake of Og's approach. Do not fear him. I have already given him into your hand. Fury. The battle was a maelstrom of shrieking iron, splintering bone, and the desperate screams of men. The sons of Israel were like wolves at the heels of bears, their fury a match for the giant's might. Then, as the armies of the 5 Amorite kings broke and fled across the valley, the heavens themselves declared war. The sky, a moment before blue, tore open into a bruised and violent purple. There was a sound like the sky ripping, and then they came, great stones of ice, divine hail, striking the earth with the force of catapults. They shattered shields, armor, and bone. The storm was their funeral dirge, and the earth drank the blood of giants. Miracle. The sun was bleeding towards the horizon, threatening to grant the enemy the mercy of darkness. Joshua, his face smeared with blood and dirt, threw his head back and roared at the heavens, a cry of desperate, impossible faith. Sun, stand still at Gibeon, and moon, in the valley of Aijalon. A collective gasp went through both armies, and then a cosmic silence. The wind died, the clouds froze. The sun, a searing orb of divine will, halted its descent. The light became eternal, uncanny. Time itself held its breath. On the battlefield, shadows stopped moving. The day of vengeance was stretched by the hand of God until the enemies of Israel were utterly destroyed. Siege. Then came Jericho. For 6 days the army of Israel marched, a silent, endless river of men, their footsteps a muffled, rhythmic heartbeat against the earth. There was no war cry, no taunt. The only sound was the alien wail of 7 ram's horns, a vibration that seemed to unravel the very air, a sound that belonged to no earthly creature. On the impossibly broad walls, the giant sentries watched, their initial mockery and laughter curdled by the 3rd day into unease. By the 6th, it was a cold, superstitious dread that crept into their hearts with every silent, relentless circuit. Shout. On the 7th day, they circled 7 times. The sun beat down. The air was thick with dust in anticipation. As the sun reached its zenith, the 7 shofars blasted a final, shattering note that cracked the sky. In the ringing silence that followed, Joshua's command was a thunderclap. Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. A sound erupted from 600,000 throats. It was not a cry of men. It was a primal roar of absolute faith, a sonic wave of such impossible force that it kicked up the dust from the plains and became a physical weapon, resonating with the very power that first spoke the world into being. Fall. The great stones of Jericho did not crumble. They did not break or shatter. For a horrifying, silent moment, they seemed to shimmer in the heat. Then, with a low, grinding groan that came from the bowels of the earth, they fell. The foundations turned to sand, the cyclopean blocks to water. The mighty ramparts did not explode outward. They slumped, liquefied, and collapsed inward, dissolving into a cataclysmic wave of dust and ruin. The laws of nature were unwritten. The city was not breached. It was erased from the world in a single, deafening moment of divine judgment. Purge. What followed was a grim and holy purge, a montage of fire and steel that swept from the mountains to the great sea. The giant clans, the Anakim, the Rephaim, the Zamzummim, were hunted to their mountain fortresses. Their idols of stone were shattered. Their altars of blood were toppled. Their cities became pillars of smoke against the dawn. It was a terrible, bloody surgery, performed with the sword as a scalpel. The land, which had groaned for centuries under the weight of a dark and ancient dominion, could finally breathe again. Inheritance. Then, from the chaos of war, came order. The land was divided not by the sword, but by the sacred lot, an inheritance drawn by the unseen hand of God. Sweeping aerial shots would show the sun-drenched hills of Judah, the fertile valleys of Ephraim, the shores of Asher. Banners bearing the sigils of the 12 tribes were planted in soil paid for with blood and sanctified by faith. A new map was drawn across the face of the world, its borders determined not by kings, but by a prophet. Sacrifice. But to the tribe of Levi, no soil was given. Their inheritance was not a place, but a presence. In the profound, incense-filled silence of the tabernacle, a Levite priest moved with solemn grace. His portion was not fields or vineyards, but the sacred fire, the holy implements, the awesome duty of standing before the Ark of the Covenant, which pulsed with a soft, divine glow. They were to be the keepers of the covenant, a living, breathing sacrifice woven into the fabric of the nation, a constant reminder that the land itself was a gift, and its owner was God alone. Warning, years bled into decades. Joshua, his hair like snow, his face a roadmap of battles and revelations, gathered the elders of Israel a final time. He leaned heavily on his staff, his body frail, but his eyes still burned with the fire of the God he had served. His voice, though thin with age, was heavy with the authority of heaven. "Be very careful to love the Lord your God," he pleaded, his gaze piercing each man before him. "For if you turn aside and cling to the remnant of these nations, they shall be a snare and a trap to you, a whip on your sides and thorns in your eyes, until you perish from this good land." Choice. His voice rose, gathering a final, desperate strength that rang across the valley. "Choose this day whom you will serve." He paused, letting the terrible weight of the choice settle upon the silent multitude. Then, his voice dropped to a quiet, unbreakable vow. "But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." For a moment, only the wind answered. Then a single voice from the crowd roared back the oath, and another, and then 10,000, until the valley thundered with a single unified wave of sound that echoed the cry that had shattered Jericho's walls. "We will serve the Lord." quiet, and the land had rest. The clang of the sword was replaced by the rhythm of the harvest. The screams of war were replaced by the laughter of children in sun-drenched vineyards. The giants were ghosts, their bones mingling with the deep soil of the land they had once terrorized. A peace settled over the hills and valleys, a quiet so profound it was almost deafening. It was the peace of a promise fulfilled, a peace as precious and as fragile as unfired clay. Echo. For a generation they remembered. For a time they heeded the old man's warning. They built their homes, planted their fields, and raised their children in the light.